In other words, that we're all swimming in the same soup. So you've got mystics from time immemorial saying this. You've got scientists now saying this, but not having an adequate theory for the mechanism by which something like this would even ever possibly be the case. Right. But people, people like you and I, and you know what's funny? Also people of faith, of a religious connotation, who might not have the metaphysics or the epistemology and all this kind of stuff informing them about the nature of consciousness. Someone else would just say, oh, that's, yeah, God.
Welcome to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner, a show about shifting our individual and collective beliefs on what is possible for the future of humanity. As our understanding of how our reality continues to shift, we are at a point of reunification between science and spirituality. What does the world look like when we break free from the generational trauma that has kept most humans playing small for thousands of years and step into our full power as the co-creators of this reality? I always ask that you keep an open mind with this podcast. Ask yourself what resonates with my truth at this time and what does not. Respect your intuition, but see if you can get through the whole show, because there might be that little nugget buried deep in the conversation that unlocks something for you.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Changing the Channel. I am joined with Connor Keys today. Thank you for coming on the show. Again, normally doing an introduction here, but you were kind of like, hey, I'm not super into introductions, so maybe you could share a little bit about that just to get
Sure.
started. Sure. This is an ongoing theme for me when I do interviews is the labels that we use to define what it is we think we're doing here and what we think of as a human experience. I I know that I constantly am running up against these labels being a poor description of whatever's trying to come through me. So I've had a number of labels, right? My background is in natural medicine. I've been an herbalist and an acupuncturist for a while now. I have been an astrologer. I've been a professional astrologer. I've done work in energy work, that kind of thing. You know, Mm. What am I? I don't know. Coach, mentor, that kind of thing. That's often what a lot of people land on when they start to talk to me about what it is that I do. What often makes sense for them is something that they might call like a spiritual life coach.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's fine, but I also think it's kind of silly, you know, right? What am I? I don't know. I'm an interfaith minister. I'm a youth mentor, you know. What you had on your paper was rapid transformational coach. Yeah, all those things are fine. We'll talk about my book. So I'm an author as well. Uh, but the thing is, it's not just me that has this issue with kind of labels and the identity of what it is I'm doing here. I really think that this is, the reason why I don't like introductions is it also, that stance on introductions also makes a statement about the human condition. Right. And it's just that. It's what I've said, that the labels that we try and use to define what it is we're doing here seldom, if ever, in fact, never really get at what it is we're trying to say and what it is that's trying to be expressed through us. Because our identity and what it is the sort of space that we fill in the field in which we find ourselves is always this sort of malleable thing. And what is trying to come through us ultimately is something which is ineffable, right? So the second I put all my eggs in one basket of an identity or a label or anything like that, it's quickly going to change. It's going to change. So yeah, I'm a musician, these things, none of this defines me, because what defines any of us is something which is ineffable and undefinable. So that's kind of my kooky introduction, but it's also part of the message. It's also part of the message here. Yeah. How's that resonate with you, Joe?
No, I get that. I mean, again, we're channels for this higher information, and to truly understand what we are as we're channeling that information, to put a label on it. Again, I think the labels are useful for many contexts. For a lot of situations, it makes sense to just kind of chop us down into these small little pieces, these little
Sure.
easily definable aspects of ourself, just for brevity of the situation, if that makes sense. But, when you are trying to portray, when you're coming on a show like this and you're trying to kind of portray who you truly are as, this unique individual, this kind of iteration of source energy, this unique being that is also a part of the entirety of the ocean. To put a label on that is silly. It kind of does not make sense necessarily.
Hmm.
So I love it. I love having these conversations with people and getting their perspectives. Finally, a place for listeners to gather and share. Join the Ascension Update Substack for messages and updates from our brothers and sisters helping with the ascension, articles on the future of humanity, and a Q&A where you can ask my guides anything you would like. This is the hub for everything ascension related. Click the link in the show notes or go to joegarner.substack.com to stay at the leading edge of this movement. And now, back to the show. So yeah, tell us a little bit about um again what you're working on right now. Like what is coming through you
Yeah.
right now?
A lot of what's coming through now is the this very mundane, very I use this word tongue in cheek, but this very 3D process of um finishing my book. My first book will be coming out soon here within the next few weeks. And that has been a fascinating process. The book itself, if I may talk about it, yeah, the book is called Trusting Your Foundation. It's a primer on nonlinear spiritual practice. And it's a book which came to me in a dream. So on November 27th of last year, I dreamt that I would write a book called Trusting Your Foundation. And then within 24 hours of the dream, the book started being written. And then in 11 days, the book was finished. And everything since then has just been editing it and wrapping it up and getting that kind of publishing stuff out there. So the book is about trust, right? And again, I just want to anchor us back into the original message here. What's trying to come through you comes from a place where our labels don't matter, right? And the conscious mind is very scared of that. The conscious mind is terrified of not having something that it thinks of as physical or concrete or real to grab onto and swing from and make sense of the world with, right? So what is this wacky introduction of hey, I'm just here. What am I? Yes, I do all these things. I serve people. People can talk to me, whatever. I write, whatever. And yet that's not the fullness of me, nor is it of anyone. Okay. It's like, okay, it's kind of like you said, well, there's certain practical implications of an identity or a label that we might want to at least play with for the sake of expediency or getting things done or something like that. And it's just funny because whenever I find myself on a podcast, I always find myself being really dissatisfied with the introductions and with the labels. And it may be just simply because for me and the work that I do, whatever that is, it's not really work, right? Um, Trusting in what's coming through is my primary value. right? And I was having a conversation with a friend about this the other day. That trust isn't something that I have to sort of lay myself out on the altar of. It's not something that I need to sacrifice anything in favor of. I like to talk about what I call teleology, which is the purpose drivenness of everything. I talk about this a lot in the book, where there's stages of consciousness, so to speak. I don't really believe that, but it's again, like you say, sometimes when we have words for things, we Hmm. we use labels and we use identities and these sort of abstract concepts to paint a picture, and that's fine. Is it the fullness of what's going on here? No, because the ineffable is the ineffable. But for the sake of conversation, I'll say that there's stages of consciousness. I'll just go ahead and fast forward to the purest expression of which, for me at least, is when I'm trusting not just in some sort of ineffable God, which my relationship with in my own conscious mind, I form stories about that can actually be painful for me. I want to be relating to the world in a way that everything is expansion and everything, what I'm trusting in is relinquishing my conscious mind's grip on the world and letting go of the oars, as they say, letting go and letting God, letting Jesus take the wheel, right?
Hmm.
Which actually means something brilliant and beautiful and expansive, not something where my sort of deeply subconsciously held convictions that God is actually an asshole, you know, who's, that part of the human condition is here. The part of the human condition is suffering, and that I chose this incarnation to learn lessons and that kind of rhetoric. I actually, I don't believe any of that. The same way that I don't believe that. I mean, like, for instance, even I'm really nitpicky about this kind of stuff, but even when we started the podcast, you were calling it like a higher vibration. And I was saying just then, like the purest expression. I find that even trying to rarefy what's happening onto a continuum is actually also missing the point as well, right? Because there's only one thing that's happening, and that includes this moment that we're in and any possible stories that my conscious mind could weave about what's going on. So when I say trust, I mean a deep kind of trust. And I also mean that what we're trusting in is that life does what life does, right? So the trees, they just grow, you know. The wind just blows and the sun just shines. And I want to be a part of that, right? Because I feel like stepping into that stream of trust in that expansion and that life, a kind of life with a capital L, and to make another Christian metaphor, life with a capital L. That's what that's just that's the kind of vital and expansive force that's talked about in Christian theology or whatever, is that. So kind of wacky, huh? What do you think, Joe?
I got a couple questions. So, one would be obviously, what is the role of the human? Is the role of the human to be human? Or do we play this weird interchange between having the conscious experience and knowing that there's something else guiding it? That we're kind of in between. We're not like the trees necessarily. I mean, again, I don't have any conscious memories of being a tree, correct? But there's certainly a difference between my ability to have affectation on reality versus the tree's ability to do that.
Sure, sure, sure.
So how do you, is part of being a human being, a human understanding that, or is there something else on, above or below that I'm not capturing?
Um, I was reminded of this by Laura Rose Gage, and I believe it comes from either like Ibn Arabi or Jalaluddin Rumi, you know. But there is this fascinating notion that the kind of spiritual but not religious new age or otherwise um impetus in people, this community, this whatever, has picked up on, and that is to say, this is a story that I've recapitulated a number of times, and I think it's fun food for thought. And that is that God made the rocks, and God said, "Ooh, shiny, you know, beautiful, different colors and things," and then and said, "That's great, but I'm gonna keep going, right?" And God made the plants and said, "Beautiful, delicious. They make fruit, they make medicine, but there's something else." And He made the animals, fuzzy, cute, majestic, the birds that fly, and all that's great, but there's something. And He came upon creating man, and the statement is, this is how I will know myself. So, I'm not sure, I would love to actually hear your questions maybe again, but I would also like to say that the second part of the question, you said the first part is like, are we just here to be human? Well, yes. And the second part was, are we these intermediaries between some two disparate forces, right? And
Right. Between God or the universe and lesser inanimate,
the
beings.
material world, yet no, right? So William Blake says you can behold eternity in the grain of us in a grain of sand, right? So um that is a Platonic ideal, which was then recapitulated in Gnosticism, and also recapitulated in its most dastardly form by our friend Rene Descartes, who gave us the Cartesian head trauma of the absolute separation between mind and body, which you extrapolate metaphysically out from there, and you get an absolute separation between um, spirit and matter, which is how it shows up in, say, uh, Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism, and things like this. And I, I'm having fun with this, so I'm going to keep going on a on the Christian motif, and that is that what we're here to do is to redeem the world, right? That the spiritualization of matter and the materialization of spirit is something that can happen the second that we recognize what's in front of our face. So the Gospel of Thomas says, "Recognize what's in front of your face, and that which has been hidden from you will be revealed."
Mhm.
Right? And so it's easy. It's easy if my identity, again, if I'm playing some sort of conceptual role of like this intermediary between matter and spirit, or and all this kind of thing, then there's work to do. Then there's a job. Then I am here to show up in this our incarnation, in this life, in a way that, I can screw it up. I could mess this up. I could not be a open enough vessel, which is ironic, because yeah, I want to be an open vessel, but I don't want the conditions that I'm placing upon myself for being an open vessel to be that I'm performing some kind of, that I'm engaging in some performance, or that I'm engaging in some kind of behavior for the sake of something. So the first answer of your question, which was, is it possible that we're just here to be human? In my personal ontology, in my personal cosmology, the kind of uh religion that I have for myself, really has to do with honoring the volition and the choice of everything. And if God does everything intentionally, if the universe creates with intention, then that means that me being born was intentional, right? So that also means that every moment preceding that in my human experience is I have the opportunity to take the invitation of recognizing that in that moment, rather than seeing it as the performance of an act or of a behavior, which I can, like, I'm not here to be a good Platonist. I'm not here to be a good Christian. I'm not here to be a good anything. I'm not here to be a good shaman. I'm not here to be a good new ager. I'm not here to be a good partner. I'm not here to be a good father. I'm not here to be a good anything. I'm here to be. And that's scary, right? That's scary to the conscious mind. Wait, 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 wait. Because then immediately what kicks in is, hold up. If you're just untethered, right? If you don't have a moral, cognitive, ethical framework that you're trying to box yourself into, right? Then all bets are off. And we know how humans can be, right? And we know, right? That's Rousseau. That's Lord of the Flies, right? That's
Right.
Art of Darkness and all this kind of thing. It's taking the nihilistic, the negative, taking this kind of post even existentialist take on human nature and then just making it ugly and evil. Let's be clear here that that's a perspective and that's a belief that does not make it true, right? That's why when I say I want to trust, right? This is where, um, people maybe of a certain religious bent might step in here and say, but if you're just totally open, well, then anything can come in, and then you're open to dark forces and evil and all this kind of stuff, right?
Right. I
Well,
had this conversation yesterday with somebody. This exact
excellent,
conversation.
excellent. Of course you did. So if that's the case, whatever happened to be not afraid? You want to go? We can go biblical even more. We could say that Joshua, what is it? It's in Joshua. I want to say like 3:1 or something. Um, where God says, "Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon the earth." So everywhere you step foot, I have given you. I have given you everywhere your soul, the sole of your foot, steps upon the earth. So, hey, man, that's deep. Like that's real, and that's deep, and that feels a whole lot better. That feels a whole lot better. Again, people of a certain religious kind of cosmology or demonology might say, well, if you're just going to do what feels good, right? And if you're just going to be totally open, then da 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 da. I've been in experiences where there was uh, pretty pretty high probability of actual intention of another agent in this scenario for there to be a kind of hexing, right? A kind of maleficent intent through magical means or otherwise, right? Upon me for something, right? And I'm here to tell you that this is exactly, again, I'm just gonna keep hammering on this because it's important to me. I act like it's just a set of circumstance, but it is important to me because I think that a lot of the religious people of the world in their cosmology and in their way of showing up to, pending, um, they circle the drain of the ineffable and the truth and the way that because they recognize the power of the the ultimateness of the divine, and they realize how near that is to their hearts and how near that is to their being.
Hmm.
And it's just something. So for a lot of Christians, say it's just invoking literally the name of Christ. And that is literally the magical abracadabra for anything and everything that could ever possibly be wrong in a person's life.
And that's not even that goes beyond Christianity. In a lot of esoteric, when you've come across a um, evil or malevolent being, the first thing that they teach you is to essentially say the name of Christ 3 times, and that being has to stop in the name
Yeah.
of Christ. Like,
Sure, sure, sure,
it
sure,
it
cool.
it
Yeah.
transcends that idea of
Yeah.
Christianity, that I think a lot of people have, and again,
Well, okay. So here's my question. Does the demon speak English? So is it Jesus Christ?
no,
Are
it's
you,
the energy.
are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure the demon doesn't speak Latin? So Iesu Cristo would be even more powerful, right?
Right.
So you said the energy. Yeah. I think it's the allowing. It's the, it's it's the allowing. It's the allowing oneself to believe in the power of what is available to us. Again, Christ
So
said, yeah,
is it the allowing or is it the belief?
I think that beliefs come from beliefs when they are true with a capital T. We're going to get kind of ontological here, but beliefs when they are true with a capital T come from the place which allows them to be that.
Right.
Right. So even our conscious mind can spin a whole lot of stories about the way that things are when you get indoctrinated. And I don't like that word, but no, I don't like that word at all. Um, I don't like that. So when you become initiated, that's yeah, into say a certain faith or a certain religion, there is some force pulling a person into a kind of knowing, into an ultimate divine center, which is true with a capital T. And then rather than taking scripture of whatever it is, the Quran or the Hebrew Bible, the Torah or the whatever, you take and actually it's maybe less the case. Jews are can be actually be pretty liberal with because they're still building their canon,
Right.
depending on the tradition. But that said, prophecy is prophecy, right? And it's possible the for a human mouth to literally become the mouth of God, or it's possible for a human hand who writes to literally become the hand of God writing.
Right.
So my question to people of faith is why isn't that possible in like through you now? And so there of course there are religious traditions, the apostolic, um, you know, um, Pentecostal tradition and things like that, and charismatic stuff where things like this still do happen. Are still very much a part of the religious experience in daily life or on Sundays or what have you. But I think that what the new age and what the spiritual community are trying to get at is this kind of this kind of beingness, this kind of force, this kind of power, which it's fun to me that like when you look at it as like the ability to exorcise demons, that to me is secondary to the way that it allows you say, you meet an old Christian woman who's just mainline, or maybe not mainline, that actually means something in Christian parlance, but just a average, theologically average Protestant. Her beliefs are that Christ came as the savior, died for her sins. She is saved as well because of her belief, because of her faith. She's Nicene Creed and all this kind of stuff. Well, okay, what's not true about the joy and the flow and the allowingness and the divinity of of that she's imbued in her human experience, that she's allowing to come through a simple act of faith. Right? So, you meet these people who are just deeply religious people and they're just happy, you know? They're just happy and present. And the things that stress out, let's say that even stress out like your new ager over here who is obsessed with spiritual hygiene, right? They are drawing a circle around themselves. They're using salt. They're smudging the house. They've got a crystal
Mhm.
grid set up. And they, we can become just as easily obsessed. Our conscious mind can become just as easily obsessed with these practices to kind of cleanse one, where getting back, I'm going to circle back around to my kind of experience where I'm thinking of one time where it was highly likely that there was some in hexing intentions coming my way from some other being in the universe. And uh what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. Nothing happened because they call it, again, Christians call it putting on the armor of God. Well, this may be another Judeo-Christian scriptures as well. In fact, I think it is. So the armor of God to me just means the ability to allow what you very obviously perceive as negative and evil to just roll off your back like water off a duck's back.
Hmm.
Again, so what this does is it gets us back at what I think of as the truth is what's happening here, which is not that I'm here to do anything. I'm not here to be a good partner or a good father or a good coach or a good writer or a good anything, right? When you just are, kind of a silly statement, right? But when my conscious mind allows being to just be through me, right? When trust and faith and allowing are my primary values, then I'm not so stressed out about the things that my conscious mind wants to make into a big deal.
Right.
And that's a big deal. That is a big deal, right? And this is something that can be accessed by anyone. And I think that is the actual true nature of what it means to be human. So when you say, are we here to just be? I think that the answer is yes. Is that complicated? Actually, no. I don't think it's complicated. I think it's pretty simple.
I think so. I think the complication seems to come around when there are differences in the level of being that each human is living, where, like you said, many human beings are actually not being, they're doing, they're living
Sure.
in their conscious mind. And as a being that is just being, how do you exist in a world that is populated by, right now seems to be a majority of humans that
Whoa.
may or may not be being.
Right. I appreciate this, Joe, that we went all the way out there. Woo! Yonder way of the ineffable. What I like to call these conversations where we're trying to say the unsayable, right? Trying to elucidate somehow with language that which cannot be language, the ineffable. I call that circling the drain. I call it when two people like you and I, when we get to this place where there's nothing more that needs to be said because we get it, right? I call that touching the bottom. And so we're playing with this. We're kind of like all the way out here on the edges, and our conscious mind wants to snap back in because that's what it does and say, well, how are you? How do you live with others who aren't doing what you're doing, right? Or something like that. And this is where another big part of um, the kind of cosmology that feels good to me. It feels good to me again, and it's like, oh, you're just making up your own cosmology. No, what's kind of been allowed to trickle out through all this, right? And yes, have I been down the new age rabbit hole? You're damn right. Have I been down the magical rabbit hole? Yes. Have I studied religion? Yes. Is some of what I'm saying informed by intellectual, rational, like study of these topics? Yes, it is. And the litmus test, the criteria for which by which I feel into, not judge, but just feel into what is right is simply that, the feeling of it, right? And it's what feels right to me to trust in is hmm, that there is a very, very deep, very, very deep, presently available sense in which you and I, Joe, are precisely the same person. So we know this from, I mean, right? I would highly recommend to any of your readers. I talk about this book in my book, to check out One Mind by Larry Dossey. It's a fantastic elucidation of this. And then secondary to that might be something like The Field by Lynn McTaggart, also classic, 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 classic. So we know these things. There's people like Dean Radin out there who are, you know, what Larry Dossey calls one mind consciousness, right? In other words, that we're all swimming in the same soup. So you've got you've got mystics from time immemorial saying this. You've got scientists now saying this, but not having an adequate theory for the mechanism by which something like this would even ever possibly be the case. Right? They just can't. I can literally observe. Well, you look at twin studies, or you look at um uh woman pulling over on the side of the road. There's actually multiple instances of this that they've documented, right? Where woman pulled over on the side of the road and has these 7 numbers in her head that won't leave her consciousness to such an extent that she has to pull over. She stops and she's like, I'm just going to call him. She calls the numbers, and who answers the phone is the hospital that has her son who just had a car wreck in the ER.
Mm.
Right. How is this possible? Well, people like you and I are like, duh. Like, duh. That's an awesome example. I love it. I love it. But people people like you and I, and you know what's funny? Also people of faith, of a religious connotation, who might not have the metaphysics or the epistemology and all this kind of stuff informing them about the nature of consciousness. Someone else would just say, "Oh, that's yeah, God."
It's God, right?
Exactly.
They're they're
Exactly.
they're giving that power away to something outside of themselves, which you
Whoa,
know,
interesting. 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 Okay. But that may or may not be true, right? Because
it yeah.
there's plenty of scriptural um work to go on that puts the kingdom within, right? And so, right, um, I think that the scriptures play in this. I think New Age plays in this. I think that it's all good. I think it doesn't matter, but I think that the sense in which you and I are the same, the reason why someone says namaste or someone says, uh, the term, I don't know the language, but it's an African language that has the term Ubuntu, which people translate as community. And I myself have heard um, the definition given that is, I am you and you are me. That is community. That's
Mm.
community, right? So that's the definition of Ubuntu, right? Um, my point is that there's really is a deep sense that when we feel ourselves wanting to move towards the I'm gonna say judgment, right? Because Joe, I trust that you're open enough to say, yeah, it's a judgment to say that there are people even here who have, because there's also, you said something about higher and lower or higher beingness. And one of the things that I pointed to midway through this conversation is that there's only one thing happening here. There's only one thing happening here. And if that's true, am I capable of sitting with the paradox that it would seem as though some people do, in fact, go to work, get home, crack open a beer, don't say a word to their spouse the rest of the night, and sit there vegging out on their thoughts with the screen going, right? Uh, get up from their chair, go to sleep, wake up from the alarm, go to work, do it again. Does that seem to be the case? It seems to be the case, yes. Does that mean that those people are not also me? No, that does not mean that those people are not also me.
Yeah, and that's the interesting, in my path, I was that person for so many years. I walked that path. I went to work, I came home, I drank a bunch of beers, went to bed with the TV on, and the next conscious memory I had was the alarm going off and,
Oh,
10
yeah.
minutes, 10 minutes to get ready for work because, I had snoozed 4 times um and again, that was me. And then all of a sudden,
I love it.
that was not me
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And uh, it's been interesting to experience that,
Is it
not
yeah,
having to change physical bodies to experience that, but to experience
right.
that in the same physical body.
Yeah. Is it possible that it's just a calling, right? Is it possible that you moving from this one way of experiencing your life to another is just right? And it doesn't warrant any kind of explanation or anything, and actually all it warrants is celebration, and that celebrating that way of being which you find yourself now feels more like taking the invitation to be fully human,
Mm,
right? And that's delicious, and that feels good. It feels delicious,
it
right?
does, yeah.
So that's all that matters, right? There's only one of us. There's only one of us. There's only one of us.
Yeah. So I was having this conversation with that same friend. We kind of brought up a couple of these points yesterday.
Cool.
And,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
one of he's fairly devout Christian. And one of his
Cool.
uh, points, and I'd love to get your understanding of this, is that the Christian worldview, the worldview that we're talking about, the oneness of everything, right? Basically, there's always two sides to a coin, but there's only one coin. And
Sure.
his argument is that what Christianity did was to realize that there's actually two coins. There's, a right coin and a wrong coin, a good coin and an evil coin. And the Christians kind of separated that out. There's a separation between humanity and God. And that's what the Christians kind of believe. So I don't know if
Yeah,
you've thought
yeah,
about
there's
that.
there's so, he depending on who you ask, um, some Christians would consider that heresy,
Right.
depending on who you ask, right? Um,
It seems like it comes a lot from writers like C.S. Lewis. They seem to be kind of touting kind of this separation between God and us.
well,
That
yeah.
that God created the world for us instead of us being a part of God in the world,
Mm. Mhm,
which is
mhm.
an interesting one. And
Yeah,
I haven't spent a lot of time
yeah.
thinking about it, but it doesn't. When I feel into that, it doesn't feel like that is the truth with a capital T.
Well, my my this is so funny. This is good. This is good, Joe. My position on this is a theological one. And I think that everything peripheral to the truth with a capital T is where we get things like rationality and logic and the conscious mind trying to make sense of things that it really, I'm not saying it has no business making sense, because how else are you going to learn how to, put together your IKEA furniture or whatever the case may be, you know, and at the same time, right? So I have this kind of notion, something tugging on me saying that God doesn't need to necessarily be logical, right?
Right.
Um, that there's a that the mystery is the mystery, and there's something foundational about that, that my conscious mind wanting to weave linear stories about things. That's not God's nature. So I can kind of, it's paradoxical, right? Of course it is. That's where the capital T is in our ability to kind of wrestle with paradox, and not wrestle with it, but just hold it gently and say, there's something in here that probably looks more like what's really real. And I know some Buddhists would have a big problem with that, because again, you're drawing a dualism by even saying what's really real. Right.
Right.
Um,
That would imply that there's something that isn't real.
right. Exactly. Right. So getting back to the oneness, right? If some kind of non-dual unity feels like to me, it feels like my surrender to that, my trust in that uh, feels like salvation. It feels like there's some ineffable answer to everything. There's some philosopher's stone contained in that. One of my favorite sayings is by a Taoist alchemist named Liu Yiming, and Liu Yiming said that the golden elixir is simply another name for one's fundamental nature, and there is no other medicine than that, right?
Mhm.
And it is neither more accomplished in a sage nor less in an ordinary person, the golden elixir. So, in other words, this kind of some coming into some appreciation or some right relation, to the extent to which it can be wrong, but a right relation with the one thing that's happening here. And to me, to allow my conscious mind to then draw these kinds of abstract, intellectual, rational stories, because everything is a story. Everything is a story. Everything is a story. When I take off this human skin and I go back home, then maybe things will look more like the one story around which all stories orbit,
Mhm.
but in the meantime, like my life, I seem to be living some kind of narrative, some kind of story. Everything is a story. And so my conscious mind wants to make up stories about things. And so for me to use this incredible power of imagination and reason and things like that, to then paint a story that God made a world separate for humans, and then it's like, is that possible? Anything is possible.
Right.
And does it feel right? Does not feel right to me. Now,
And
someone
that
would say,
that would be the argument, would be that it feels right to this other individual from their perspective, from their lens of, again, we're all
I would
viewing
also,
reality
I
from
would,
different perspectives.
I would also, I'm also going to make an assumption here. And people of a certain kind of faith, which is funny to me, even to me even say like certain kind of faith, but like there's certain kinds of approaches to religion, say, which is funny because there's only one faith, there's only one religion, there's only one of us in the room, and yet there's certain stories running in the world. It would seem that the response to that would be like, Connor, the religious truth that we've got here doesn't have to feel good to you in order to be the truth, right? Right. And right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
That
it doesn't
right,
have to feel true to
right,
everyone, and it probably won't feel true to everyone.
right. My response to that, right? Because it's like, well, just because it doesn't feel right to your sensibilities doesn't mean that it's not the God's truth as we've received it through prophecy and revelation and scripture
And
and God's word.
another rebuttal to that would be, imagine somebody who for 30 years grew up without it feeling right, and then one day, now it does feel right. What changed within that person? The truth didn't change, the person changed.
So right. So what changed maybe is a level of conviction to something, but also, I'm just going to leave that there. What I would say to that, if someone were to say the truth doesn't have to feel good to you to be truth, right? My response to this would actually be that it seldom does to the conscious mind because the God is so big and so one thing and so all encompassing, right? That for me to even say, I am you, I am the person who goes to sleep with the TV on. Obviously no judgment passed on anyone, but like I am, I am the axe murderer.
Mhm.
I am the this or that person and the whatever, right? Um, for me to step into that kind of non-dual space is in many ways more perplexing and in some ways a deeper invitation to trust than were my belief to be that God is separate from the world, created this one, and I've got a kind of a cosmology of this and thatness in which these things are separate. In fact, I see that as kind of a metaphor for what's happening at the level of everything and the kind of paradoxical fact, the paradoxical perception that what seems to be happening is my conscious mind, for whatever reason, stepping right outside of that, just like right outside of that door, like through that threshold, and then making up all kinds of bullshit
Mhm.
about life when there's actually just one thing going on here. I mean, that's just as troubling. So to
It's
someone who would, yeah.
it's
Does that make sense?
incredibly tricky, and I struggled with this on my journey as well, as far as using the worldview of non-duality as a way of being in this physical existence, because it is so paradoxical. It's not a very good worldview to succeed in the physical world, in the third dimensional
I love
world.
it. I
It
love it.
it is
Yeah.
such a useless worldview, and useless in the fact that it doesn't create value. It doesn't create, what society wants us to create, right? Like it,
Right.
it's the opposite of what society would want
I
to
I
create.
I disagree on more than one level, but I know exactly what you're saying. I think that actually when we surrender to what's being asked of us, when we take the invitation to be here, human, real in that fullness and 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 allow what is yearning through our hearts. It's the still small voice whispering, calling out to us to 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 dream and to be and to just that, right? That power that's latent in every moment. Okay. That this is funny, but I'm just gonna say that like were we to live in a world where more of that was the case, which is not possible because there's only one thing happening, right? So, right. But just taking the invitation to allow that to come through creates actually the most valuable things on earth.
Mhm.
and in our human experience, right? All artists, all the best artists. I was watching an interview with Jacob Collier last night. I love it. I was watching an interview with Jacob Collier. If you don't know who Jacob Collier is, he's our generations, and he's like 20, he's like 29 or 30 or something. Like he's uh our kind of modern day musical super genius polymath guy. And he's not only musically brilliant, but if you listen to his philosophy too on life, it's what we're talking about for the most part, I think, right? Because he says that the things that he creates, that he says, and take it or leave it, that there's a judgment being made about what a true artist is versus what a not a true artist is. So just leave that at the door. But to say that a true artist creates things because they want to create them, not because they're not to get followers, right? Not to live up to some expectation or some, like we were talking about earlier, like I'm not here to be a good anything. I'm here to be. And so an artist says I'm creating to create. That's exactly what that's exactly what God does, I think. Creates for the sake of creation. And that's an additive process. So expansion to me is the name of the game, growth and expansion and fruitfulness and things that inherently feel good. Does that mean that life is always daisies and stuff? It means that at some level, it is.
Hmm.
It means that, right? It means that our conscious mind, um, making up stories about what's happening, that's a different thing. You realize you can just switch your role, what you think of as your identity or your role in an environment or in a environment, in some kind of scenario or something like that, and everything changes.
Right. It's that meme of, the two people sitting on either side of the bus, and one side is rain clouds and storms, and the other side is sunshine and
Oh, awesome.
rainbows.
Yeah.
And it's, your perspective changes your reality and, the stories that you tell yourself. And that's kind of the value, I think, of the stories telling that we do, is because we get to choose which story we're telling ourselves. And that, again, going back to the Christian worldview, like they tell themselves such a beautiful story that their sins have been, you know,
It's all good.
saved, that everything that they do is good in God's eyes,
Yep.
and they don't have to worry about that. And, that's again a story that they're telling themselves. And, fundamentally, from the human perspective, the story of non-duality is also not technically verifiable from our perspective. I mean, you can feel into it. You can
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
have an experience, whether it's through an altered state of consciousness, through meditation, through
Yeah.
drugs, through something along those lines, where you do
Sure.
experience what people would call non-duality, where they go to the void, where they're in this level of consciousness where they don't experience separation from everything else. But again, it it's the story that you're telling yourself of what has happened to you physically, non-physically, mentally, or
Sure.
emotionally. It is
Sure.
just
Sure. Sure.
kind of a story. And that's
Sure.
the tricky part about all of this. The Christian believes that his worldview is right. The non-dualist believes his worldview is right. That, um, you know, the, um, the Greek and Roman gods are the only true gods. If we were having this conversation 2,500 years ago, um, all of these just seem to be stories that help us understand something that we don't fully understand, and having those connections directly to whatever you call it, God, source, the universe. Those are the only things that are felt senses that I think we can take away from. And then all the words that come out of our mouths describing that are just the stories that are trying to describe that ineffable feeling of the interconnectedness of all of us.
So I talk a lot about this in my book, Joe. I talk a lot about this. And um, I'm going to be paradoxical.
No way.
And that is to say, Yahweh, that's Yahweh. That is to say that you do understand it.
Right.
You do understand it completely, even, right? And that all attempts to get at that and then orient ourselves, take this conscious mind that wants to do all this song and dance. Um, it's the question to take the invitation to orient ourselves to what's actually going on here,
Right.
and so you do really understand it. And people, when I work with people one on one, they get at first they're frustrated with the rhetoric at play here, but eventually, it takes about 30, 45, sometimes an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending. We touch down. We get to the place where truth, what I say, that truth walks into the room. And when truth walks into the room, nothing else needs to be said, because we understand that we understand. We've remembered to remember, to know that we
Mhm.
understand, that we understand everything.
Yeah, it's the beauty of when two masters come together from completely separate worldviews and they have a 2-minute conversation and they recognize it's like, oh, he knows. We might be saying different words, we might be using different terms, we might be telling different stories, but at the fundamental level, like
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
that understanding.
I touched down. I talked a lot about this in other interviews and stuff, but I talk about how touching down like that, touching the bottom, like getting to the oneness, the reality, like having that conversation where you can feel the magic of, yeah, the presence of God, right? That can happen with absolutely anyone. So my uh my kind of like archetype is I can have that conversation with Billy Bob in the um cantaloupe aisle wearing nothing but overalls and missing his front teeth. Like, I can I can touch down with anyone, and I can do it instantly. I can do it without words, right? We can, right? So, it again, it's not a matter of like your some level of achievement and consciousness or anything like that. It's simply a matter of allowing yourself to be who it is you actually are.
Yeah, and
And
that's
that's
it.
it. That's it.
And that's it. Well, I think
Yeah.
that is a wonderful place to
Awesome, dude.
draw a
Awesome.
line in the sand on this
Yeah, man.
conversation. Not that it
What
is over, but a good hour into this conversation, I think it's a good stopping point. Give us just a little bit. Where can people find your book? How can people get a
Yeah,
hold of you? Give us the best way to contact you.
sure. Sure. So I'm on most social media platforms now as Connor Keys. That's Connerkees. It's Connor with an E, Keys with two E's. Um, and one of the best places is my website. So connorkeys.com. That's CONNERKEES.com. And I've recently set up something where once you've signed up to my newsletter, you're going to be invited to join something called The Mirror, because I've been hosting these weekly conversations with Laura Rose Gage. I'm going to start hosting these weekly conversations with Laura Rose Gage. I've been doing them on kind of an intermittent basis. They're called Talking in the Mirror. And I've been doing these conversations on an intermittent basis, but we're going to amp that up some, just to talk, just to communicate with people, just to have these kinds of conversations. To touch down, really. And so we're gonna ramp that up and start doing that on a weekly basis. But if you go to connorkeys.com, you sign up for the mailing list, you can be invited into the Mirror, which is where you get access to all of my content, including some exclusive content like exclusive interviews and things like that. And that's also where, if you sign up, I'll be letting you know when the book is ready, you know? And by the way, the way that this book is being released is in physical format and ebook format. But when you get a copy, there will be QR codes in the book that link you to the audiobook of me reading the audiobook for every chapter at the beginning of every chapter. So, in other words, a physical copy of the book comes with a free audiobook, right? So I'm doing this because it's the way that if someone told me that a book had a QR code at the beginning of every chapter that took you to the audiobook for it, I would be like, sign me up, right? So this is
Right.
I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about that because I'm a big audiobook listener too. And the ability to overlap audio and visual when you're taking in an experience like that is like super cool. So but of course audiobook is just as good, like I'm really excited about that, about the way that we're doing this book. So like
Yeah,
we
for
have
me,
yeah,
like, reading and listening, the retention probably quadruples.
sure.
Um, Watching YouTube videos and I'm reading along with the caption while also watching the video. I mean, my
Totally.
retention at least triples. So
Totally.
I love that, having the physical book and listening along.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that. And that's really funny because the word retention, like the retention of information, I know exactly what you're saying, but I would also say that for me, for this book, retention is not there's nothing to retain in this book,
Right.
right? The book you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
the book is a reminder. And like I said, the subtitle for the book is A Primer on Nonlinear Spiritual Practice. A primer might sound kind of technical. Trust me that there's very little technical in it. It is what I consider a work of kind of mystical prose. Like I said, it was written in 11 days. I sincerely don't think I was the one writing it, but yeah. So because who am I?
Right.
You know? So yeah, man. I gotta say, Joe, this was a fantastic conversation, brother.
I
Yeah.
loved it. Always, we've had 3 or 4 of these conversations over the
We
last
have.
7 or 8 months, and every single one is wonderful. So I'm sure I'll be having you back on the
Yeah.
show again in the next couple of months. And
Rock and roll.
I just, love you, brother. It's always a joy to have you on.
Love you too, man.
All right, have a good one.
Much love. Yep.
Thank you again for listening to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the podcast, hit the bell to know when a new show comes out, share with a friend, and rate us on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It helps get these messages out to more people to create the collective shift in reality we are here to experience. Make sure you interact with the Q&A and poll sections of the show so I can continue to provide content you enjoy. Finally, check out my website in the show notes to become a VIP of Changing the Channel and join the shift that is happening.